We've all heard of the Sermon on the Mount, right? Yes? Did you know there was also a Sermon on the Plain? It is. There is. Right in the Gospel of Luke. As a matter of fact, I read it this morning. That is some people call it the Sermon on the Plain. I don't know if you've ever heard that term before. That's the thing. Both were preached early in Jesus' ministry, and both were related to or tied to the calling of his first followers or disciples. There's some similarities between the two, but there's also some very significant differences. The Sermon on the Plain was after Jesus had spent time on the mountain top praying, and then he came down to a level area. You know, Jesus loved to be off by himself and pray. He did. He set the perfect example. You see, because what happens with us sometimes, right? You get up in the morning, and if you're not careful, or if we're not careful, I don't want to sound like I'm preaching to you. If we're not careful, what happens? We go, oh man, we look at our Google Calendar, or those of you that are still in the analog mode, that write in your calendars, you're like, wait a minute, I don't have time for Jesus today, man. I got too much going on. I can't even spend the time to say a quick prayer, and you're just off and running. What happens typically? Are those days really smooth and ordered? No, usually not. They're like, what happened? On the other hand, take time to pray. You see, because Jesus only had 3 years. We have to remember that. He only had 3 years to do his ministry. But he didn't care. He still took time to be alone, to pray, to be by himself. And what do when we in the morning, when we wake up and go, Lord, my feet just hit the floor. I'm going to pray. I'm going to praise you. What happens in those days? Most of the time, they're pretty smooth. Most of the time. Not always, but they are. So when he did a Sermon on the Plain, in keeping with the theme of level ground, this sermon is sort of sparse in terminology, and very, very earthy, the terminology. Here's an interesting thing, if you think about it. Jesus went up and then sat down to deliver the Sermon on the Mount, and he went down and stood up to preach the Sermon on the Plain. In the Sermon on the Mount, we have 8 Beatitudes. Some people say 9 because one of them is really long and they want to split it in half, but typically it's 8. Here we only have 4. Sermon on the Mount was directed to a very, very, very Jewish crowd. They could probably take the extra. Sermon on the Plain was more of a Gentile group. That's why Jesus kept the terminology and everything rather sparse. Some have argued, and I agree, that both the Sermon on the Plain and the Sermon on the Mount are our marching orders for what it means to be human. Humans filled with and by the divine. What it means to be a Jesus person, or Jesus people, or dare I say, Jesus freak. How many of you have ever been called a Jesus freak? I have. And I was like, yeah. You're darn right. Jesus, I was like, God, that guy's a Jesus freak, right? Bible thumper, Jesus freak, Yeah, hey, I'm all in. Call me what you want. And I'm okay with it. What it means to be Jesus people, though. The Sermon on the Plain is rich, though, with this imagery that recalls who God originally intended us to be. Not who we are now, but who he intended us to be. But here's the good news, too. Because we are in this world, but not what? Of this world. When we try to strive to be this kind of human that's filled by the divine, the world doesn't like it. So some of the benchmarks for everyday living that were laid down in both the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain caused the world to recoil and to scoff at us. Here's just a few examples with the world's counterpoint. Love your enemies. Good, right? World. Yeah, right. Bury them. Shame them. Make them pay for what they did. Do unto me? Yeah, I'll do worse unto you. Only Jesus people can even begin to try to love our foes. It's one of the hardest things we are called to do as Christians. Would you agree with that? I would. Pray for those who curse us. Love on those who scoff at our faith. It's not easy. I often fail. Nonetheless, as Jesus people, that's exactly what we're called to do. I want to give you a quick example of this, of me failing on this. Love your enemies. Those of you might remember I had a little mini battle with my neighbor there next door to Eunice, Al. Battle, man. It seemed like ever since we moved in, because he had all those birds and ducks and all that stuff, and geese and honking, and we were all, it kind of came to a head one day, and we kind of had words, and he told me, yeah, you're not even a real pastor. I think he thought, well, that'll hurt, and I often tell myself that also, because you know me, I'm my own worst critic. I don't need him to tell me that, right? But anyway, so he did. And then, so the point is this, I did not like that guy, and he didn't like me at all. I mean, we weren't going to be friends. But then he went in the hospital, and I thought, we're supposed to pray. We're supposed to pray for our enemies. We're supposed to love them. So Janine and I prayed for Al for quite a while. And then the other day, Erica told me he passed away. And, at no point in my disdain for him did I ever, say, oh, I wish he would just, die. No, I'm not going to say that. But there was a point where I wouldn't have minded if he, sprained his ankle. I'm just going to tell you that for sure right now, right? We did not like each other. But when I heard he died, I prayed for his, widow, for Katie, and for the whole family, That's what we're called to do. And man, I'm telling you, it's not always easy. And I'm sure every single person in this room has a story like that. Maybe you have a story of when you mended that bridge, or maybe you have a story where it's something that you need to mend. We're called to do that. Okay? Do unto others as you would have them do to you. Great, right? No. Do it to them before they can do it to you. Right? We like to treat ourselves well, don't we? Who do we treat better than ourselves? Not many people, right? Most of the time we treat ourselves better than anyone. Jesus calls us to also harbor that same unconditional love and servant's heart towards people that we don't like. Here's a good one for you. Do not judge. Nope. I'm going to point out that tiny little splinter in your eye and ignore the gigantic 4x4 in mine. This one's really seems to be on full parade, too, at today's vocal platforms for anyone that has an opinion or an idea. Judging and comparing seem to be the preferred food of a lot of social media posts these days. Here's another one. Out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. Good deal, right? Yeah, good news or bad news. If your heart's full of compassion and grace, the words that come out of your mouth are going to be loving and graceful and compassionate. On the other hand, if you have a heart full of distrust and anger, you're going to say, I've got a right to my opinion, even if it's hurtful and loud. I need to be heard, even if my views are offensive and I hurt people. Loud and proud, baby, that's how I roll. That's the world. Jesus said in John 10:10, the thief, and we know who the thief is, right? Satan comes only to kill and destroy. I came that they may have life. And life, what? Not meager, not barely eking out an existence. Abundantly. Abundantly. This is how Jesus' people are to grab onto this abundant, dare I say it, overboard life by clinging to these tidbits of treasure that Jesus gave us this morning in these 4 Beatitudes. And in doing so, we're not being deprived. We're not. In fact, we're basking in the good life Jesus has planned for us. Jesus people, though, we swim upstream. We're just like the salmon, man. We swim upstream against popular culture that just shakes their head. They just don't get it. right? I think sometimes we tend to focus too much in the church on addition, on church growth, or even sometimes the division within the church. Sometimes it seems that the church, particularly nowadays, is falling apart at its collective seams. That we know the church in a pandemic world has definitely been different and turned the norm on its head, and we've had to find new ways to continue to reach people and preach the gospel. But I don't think we ever hear anything about subtraction, taking away. Let me give you an example. Michelangelo. Everybody knows Michelangelo, right? It was said that he was asked once about the extreme difficulty of producing one of his masterpieces, which was King David, the statue of King David, right? And the guy, whoever it was, said, wow, that must have just been incredible, right? Supposedly, Michelangelo replied nonchalantly, it's not that hard. All you have to do is chip away everything that doesn't look like David. Doesn't look like David. So perhaps this is what we should do. Chip away or take away everything that's not in God's image for us, in God's original plan. Chip it away. Because after all, it is Jesus plus nothing, right? Jesus plus nothing equals everything. The Sermon on the Plain gives us a scaled down or bare bones definition of a set of guidelines, what it takes to be a Jesus person, a follower of Jesus. Subtracting, chipping away at everything in our lives that does not look like Jesus. Jesus had a favorite expression for himself, and it was the Son of Man. Weird, huh? 81 times he used it in the Gospels, and the same term Son of Man is used over 100 times in the Old Testament. But in the Old Testament, it's always referring to mortal human beings. So why did Jesus refer to himself as the Son of Man? Well, what's interesting to ponder is this possible translation of the Son of Man as the human one, the human one. The fully human one, what it means to be human. We were all meant to be fully human. And Jesus shows us how to do that in these 4 Beatitudes, which could be called his Humanist Manifesto. But then, you see, as you notice also at the end of the Sermon on the Plain, they're both blessings, but what's at the end? Woes. They call them woes or warnings. These warnings are offered up as potential consequences if you're not following the Jesus people way. And then later on, we didn't read it, it ends with a final section regarding Jesus principles, building your house on a rock versus building your house on the world's principles, which is sand and usually quicksand, because you're falling into it really quickly. If we are to live what I'm calling the true human life, the Jesus life, as Jesus people, not a popular culture person, we need to be ready to hear the scoffers and feel the persecution. As Jesus said, we read it today, woe to you. Not yay for you. He didn't say yay. He said woe to you when all speak well of you. For that is what their ancestors did with the false prophets. We also know Jesus told us at the end of the Gospel of John this. He said, in this world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I've overcome the world. You see, when we follow the Jesus way, I hate to tell you, I'm going to break it to you right now, you're going to be sad. When we follow the Jesus way, more than likely, we're going to lose followers on Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all the social platforms, because the Jesus way flies in the face of the world's way. So, if we're to be a Jesus human, not a society human, not a Facebook human, not a Snapchat human, not a Hollywood human, we're going to have to prepare for all kinds of hatred and mocking. So are we really living the life of a Jesus human? Here's the thing. If we are, part of the way that we'll know is this. We as Christians are called sometimes to go to places that we don't want to go. We're going to go to places we don't want to go. See people we may not want to see. To reach out with the love of the gospel. You see, the fact is, if we're not stirring up what I'm going to call holy trouble, not holy heck or another word, but holy trouble, then there's something going on. If we're not stirring up some holy trouble, and everyone thinks we're and I'm going to use this term, bee's knees, beware. We may not be living out the truly human Jesus life that we can be. Because the Jesus life is not always going to just be comfy, sitting in here with all our friends and our fellow Jesus lovers that love Jesus. Sometimes we're going to have to go out into the world because that's where it's really needed. That's where the darkness is. And that's what we're called to do. Let's strive. Let's strive this week and always to be Jesus people. Jesus humans. Heck, Jesus freaks. And let's live the full, abundant life that was planned for us from the very beginning of time. And it sounds counterintuitive, but the more we give, the more we get. That's just the way it works. Try it. Try it. Try to be a Jesus human this week and see how it works. Amen.
Amen.